Unfiltered, uncensored, unprecedented TV. Good afternoon and welcome to this second ever episode of The Leading Edge with me, Basil Valentine. Things might be changing here at Unprecedented TV. This is a recorded announcement, as they used to say. I'm filming this on Monday afternoon, but you won't see it until Tuesday. So from next week, I've decided I'm going to go live. Funnily enough, I prefer it. It is more pressure, but it's more fun as well. And it also means that one can comment real time on the news as it's happening, rather than obviously several hours in advance. The cycle moves so quickly these days, and our attention span is so short that I think what we need is a regular spot where you can come at lunchtime every day and you can get an hour of me telling you the news, talking about the news, bringing you right up to date with what's going on in Britain and around the world. And I will be commenting on clips from social media as well, from other news sources, of course, giving you my own insights. And I'll be talking to a regular coterie of esteemed guests to get their opinion on world events as well. And joining me for this second edition is my good friend and sometime host over there in Sweden. I was there just over a year ago. I'm talking, of course, about the geopolitical analyst Mats Nilsson. Welcome to the program, Mats.
Thank you, Basil.
My
Always
pleasure.
A pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine. Now, we're recording this on Monday afternoon, just as a parade, really, of European leaders are arriving in Washington in order to beg Vladimir Zelensky to continue the war. And this in spite of the fact that over 80% of Ukrainians want it to end. There's a huge disconnect here, isn't there, Mats, between opinion in Ukraine, opinion in the rest of Europe, and this coterie of Russophobes that populate London, Brussels, and Berlin, who are determined to see the war continue, whatever the cost.
Yes, well, this little summer holiday that they're going on, the European leaders, I think is basically because they are highly afraid of a situation where a defeat, or at least a permanent peace deal, quickly could radicalize Ukraine. Because you have to remember that from a Ukrainian perspective, there has been an ongoing propaganda campaign pointing to Minsk 1 and 2 being Russia's fault. They're blaming the Budapest Memorandum on the Russians. You have the Bucha and Irpin staged events. And then, of course, you have the casualty rates that are soaring. So there is a lot of feeling amongst at least the fighting men within Ukraine that they want to continue fighting until Russia suffers big enough losses. So I think the Europeans know and fear that a deal will ultimately fail to grapple these effects of a cessation of violence. So, I mean, in the long term, the dim prospects of Ukraine being able to reestablish some sort of normality is going to be very, very far away. The war situation, or the warlike situation right now, is the normal state of things in Ukraine. Should peace come, and should Ukraine have to start to deal with ordinary issues, so to speak, of establishing a welfare state, taking care of the veterans, demobilizing, I mean, the territory could quickly descend into some sort of situation that's in resemblance of Germany post World War I. And I think that the European leaders know this, and I think they also know this, that they will be the ones to have to deal with this issue once it arrives. So therefore, it's a better situation for them to at least continue the fighting. So you can use the propaganda to keep the Ukrainians motivated against an external enemy and not against their own internal enemy.
Well, it seems that Zelensky's already made plenty of internal enemies. I was doing a bit of research on this subject before coming on air and came across the work of, amongst others, Diana Panchenko, former TV host and journalist of the year in Ukraine. She says she was formerly amongst Ukraine's top 10 most influential women, but Zelensky has imposed personal sanctions against her and against the constitution. She writes that he's tried to confiscate her property, stripped her of any rights, and launched 2 criminal trials. Before the war began, I was in Kiev, she said. I've been to Donetsk, where the war has raged for 8 years already. And for the last 15 years, I've been appealing to people's reason. I've been calling to peace. You may ask, how could that be today when the whole world is defending the Ukraine? I will tell you, I've in-depth knowledge about this war, which is being funded by the EU and American citizens. I can reveal where all your money is going. Today, Ukraine is making headlines. I know Zelensky and his team personally. I know all Ukrainian politicians and journalists, and I can tell you exactly what they all lie about. We stand on the brink of the Third World War, closer than ever before. It may sound horrible, but I have the moral right to tell you the truth. The Ukrainian government is motivated to escalate this confrontation so they won't be held accountable for the money they've stolen from you. You don't want to be deceived anymore? My family and I are currently facing threats, and many of my colleagues are imprisoned for voicing their opinions. Mainstream media may not report these injustices, but I will. I've accumulated numerous facts over the years that could change your perspective about this war. And with that in mind, we have an update, which is that $5 billion in cryptocurrency has been attempted to be smuggled out of the country by various Ukrainian officials, as we can hear now in this clip from X.
Що робити, якщо у вас дуже багато грошей, але всі вони незаконні, вкрадені? Може там їх якось ховати в крипті, але, знаєте, коли це вже мова пішла про мільярди, з цим складно. І тут оце питання обговорювали саме там, на цій квартирі Міндіча. Це одне з того, що потрапило на ці знамениті плівки. І питання стояло так, як припаркувати 5 мільярдів євро вкрадених, які зараз в крипті? Нормальне питання? Ще раз, 5 мільярдів євро. І думали, вирішили, треба купити банк, якийсь європейський. А там вже через банк все виведемо. Так, де думали, Франція, гарна країна, чого ні. La France, Paris, супер. І, значить, проговорили це. Тепер питання, треба ж на когось оформити, в кого є гроші? Білі, хоч якісь. Виявляється, в брата Ростислава Шурми, який був заступником голови Офісу президента, відповідав за економіку. В Олега Шурми білі гроші, хоч відносно білі, сіренькі, але є. Значить, давайте на нього оформимо. Це там обговорювали. Потім виявили, що це не так просто, що у Франції є регулятори, які питають, звідки гроші, друзі? А звідки у вас їх стільки? Була там навіть думка, обговорювала, що може Макрона попросити про допомогу. Не знаю, чи просили, чи ні, але все це на плівочках. І нещодавно в Шурми в Німеччині. Ви ж не думаєте, що після того, як він залишив Офіс президента, він залишився жити в Україні? Правильно? Ні, звісно. Він поїхав жити в Німеччину. Тобто там проводили обшуки НАБУ та німецькі правоохоронці. Одне з питань, яке було, це стосовно цієї спроби купівлі банку за ці ярди євро. Така історія, друзі. І таких історій там немало. Україна має почути плівки Міндіча.
There you have it. I couldn't understand that any better than you can, Mats, but we had the subtitles. Fortunately, he is a member of the Ukrainian parliament, and he says he has proof, wiretapped conversations, that Zelensky's team are trying to launder $5 billion and are even planning to seek help from Emmanuel Macron. Do you want to be an accomplice in this theft? Asks Diana Panchenko, hoping that Donald Trump will reveal the evidence in today's meeting with Zelensky and the European leaders. We've known for a long time that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. There's been no audit of where all these billions funneled, particularly from the United States, have gone. Of course, we can't tell simply from that little clip whether he's telling the truth or not. But surely it's, there's got to be some sort of meaningful investigation into that kind of allegation.
Well, of course, there has to be a meaningful investigation, but right now there is a lack of meaningful political happenings in Ukraine. I mean, the constitution says that there should be at least local elections, and there's discussion about the presidential elections when they could be held. But the support for the nationalist fractions in Ukrainian politics and the far right remains. It's still a minority. However, I think it was the July or June poll, the national core reached around 7 or 8%, which is their highest rating as of yet. And Zelensky's party, servants of the people, that's just a creation that they didn't even exist a decade ago, and they don't really have any ideological base. So Ukraine's political scene is not dominated by entrenched old parties. They're basically dominated by political parties run by different oligarch fractions. So especially in the wake of this devastating war, I think the Ukrainian political landscape would be highly affected by accusations such as this, and be very susceptible to quickly transforming, sometimes perhaps violent rebellions. So from out of nowhere, old political parties could quickly disappear. And I think we have to remember that Valery Salushny, who is right now being groomed for further escapades in London, as he's the Ukrainian ambassador in the United Kingdom, the old military man, Valery. So while Valery is not an extremist, he's still a hardliner of sorts. So I would say that Zelensky needs to deal with these issues before a peace deal is made. Otherwise, otherwise it would be a huge strategic error on Zelensky's behalf if he has any wish to survive the upcoming peace or ceasefire deal.
It has to be debated whether or not Zelensky wants peace. You could say the same about Putin, of course, but a peace for Zelensky would surely mean the end of his political career, certainly the end of his time in the limelight, swanning around with the various popinjays who populate the heads of government of European countries, plus, of course, the dreaded von der Leyen creature, who will also be in Washington. He says that under Ukraine's constitution, Ukraine cannot give up any land, but it's massacred its own citizens, banned the church, he's imprisoned the opposition, and completely crushed the media. So this is rank hypocrisy, isn't it? Here is the dreaded little dictator, the Ukrainian Napoleon himself.
Russia is still unsuccessful in Donetsk region. Putin has been unable to take it for 12 years. And the constitution of Ukraine makes it impossible to give up territory or trade land. Since the territorial issue is so important, it should be discussed only by the leaders of Ukraine and Russia at the trilateral Ukraine, United States, Russia. So far, Russia gives no sign that trilateral will happen, and if Russia refuses, then new sanctions must follow.
Zelensky doing his best to appear reasonable there, but the Ukrainian constitution, what's the validity of that particular document, Mats?
The validity, it's only valid as long as the core of the Ukrainian state holds firm. There is, I mean, at any moment, Ukraine starts to move toward ultranationalism to hedge against a perceived continued threat, or dare I say, in response to a disappointment in the face of a peace deal, the populists will be up in force, and they will be justifying launching an attack on that constitution. You have to remember that the old constitution from 2014 was ignored when Yanukovych was ousted in February. That was not done by way of that current constitution. So, I mean, the Ukrainians have a history of ignoring the constitution when it fits the purpose of the most or of the latest violent group of rebellious individuals within Ukraine. So I would deem the Ukrainian constitution, the strength of it, I would see it as a recommendation, but it's nowhere near as loved or as supported as other comparable Western countries' constitutions. It's not held in any, it's not sacrosanct or held sacred by the political elite or the government of Ukraine. It's very susceptible to being bent and molded along the lines of a temporary minority that wants to gain power.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that's, as you said, various factions in Ukraine jockeying for position, no long-established political parties, no real seasoned political leadership. You know, when you set Zelensky and his cohorts against the likes of Lavrov and Putin, it's like a football match between Real Madrid and a Sunday pub team, if you ask me. But the Russians don't always do themselves any favors. Just in advance of the talks, they are claimed, at least, to have launched missile strikes in northeastern Kharkiv in a residential neighborhood, killing 10 people, including a 16-year-old and her toddler brother. Amongst 7 people killed, 23 wounded. This was in the, another 23 people were wounded in a ballistic missile strike on the southeastern city of Zaporizhia. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist or too much of a cynic, Mats, but is there a possibility that these could be false flag strikes by the Ukrainians themselves in order to, gain sympathy ahead of the Washington meeting?
No, I think the Sumy attack on the marketplace in Sumy was an attempt to gain that kind of sympathy, but it fell flat. The other 2 attacks, I have looked at them, and they were the effect of Ukrainian anti-aircraft interceptions, especially the Kharkiv case recently. I did some thorough looking into, and 4 of the drones hit the military targets that were beyond the civilian building. The 5th drone was hit by Ukrainian anti-missile defenses and landed too early, thereby striking the roof of the apartment building that was right in front of the military complex or the military staging area that Russia wanted to strike. So it's a sad. It's just sad. It wasn't on purpose, but the effects were, of course, had there been no Russian drones, those people would have been alive, no matter if it was anti-aircraft fire or the drones themselves. So had there been no war, they would have been alive. But it wasn't Russia deliberately trying to sink themselves, so to speak.
Amongst the arch Russophobes in Europe, of course, has been the British government, who've had some kind of festering enmity towards Russia. Well, some people would say for 200 years, but certainly this century. But Keir Starmer's latest remarks as he heads over to Washington would appear to be striking a more conciliatory note. He said the war in Ukraine has been going on a really long time now, 3+ years. It's hugely impacted the Ukrainians, who've suffered hugely, but it's also impacted Europe, every single family and community in the United Kingdom. And so everybody wants it to end, not least the Ukrainians. Well, that seems to be a change in tone, if you ask me, Mats.
Well, yes, it is, but I think Britain is only temporarily giving up because they realize they can't go forward without a friend in Washington. So it's the British looking at Ukraine. They're looking at Ukraine. How shall I put this? Basically, they're thinking it's about Russia first and democracy in Ukraine. That's second. So Britain wants to finish the job and try to, dismantle Russia and try to get in there to gain the resources that the Russian nation right now is composed of. And considering Russia is a federation, both the CIA and also the different think tanks have been active trying to stake out a way forward whereby you can go in and bend out different areas or provinces within the Russian Federation. I mean, the case in point is of course Chechnya, where this was tried. I mean, there was CIA involvement. There was CIA was giving a helpful hand to the Mujahideen that they transferred in from outside to be of assistance to the forces fighting the Russian Federation in Chechnya. So I think the British, they still want to go this way. It's not that they're dreaming of putting their troops back in Arkhangelsk like they did in 1918, but they're dreaming of, by way of subversion, trying to dismantle Russia like they once did with Yugoslavia. And even though we had the Dayton Accords came after months of negotiations, and then the problems have simmered on. So I think it's just a strategic retreat by Starmer. It's not something that he's looking into in any truthful or meaningful way. He's not a man of peace by any means.
Well, he's a man of many things, but none of them very good, if you ask me. Keir Starmer, the most unpopular prime minister since records began, a truly abysmal figure, authoritarian. He manages to combine being an authoritarian with being ridiculously bland as well. He manages to combine being a warmonger while being pathetically weak himself. But he said last week, and this was echoed by the Defence Secretary, an equally abysmal appointment, John Healey, that Britain is ready to put UK boots on the ground when there's a ceasefire. But the Russians have said in the past that they would regard UK troops on the ground in Ukraine as hostile. So, for all that it sounds like this is a sensible move, all this talk about a coalition of the willing, it's just poppycock, isn't it, Mats?
Of course, it's all rhetoric, it's all propaganda, it's all about the narrative, and a ceasefire will always be more volatile than a peace agreement. So if the British and the European Union wants to put boots on the ground during a ceasefire, it's inevitably going to be an escalation, either by way of a new false flag or by way of breakaway segments within the Ukrainian forces that will start attacking Russia again. So and if you, after that ceasefire, have British and EU troops on the ground in Ukraine, the mix is going to be explosive so much quicker than it is today. So there is a reason to try and avoid the ceasefire even more, in case they actually go through with the promise of putting boots on the ground if a ceasefire should be agreed upon.
So, in other words, what we really need is a peace agreement, or
Yes,
at least
that
you
is
go on. I was going to
that
say at
is
least a
so.
roadmap towards it, rather
Yes,
than a sort of fragile frozen conflict scenario.
yes, because the frozen conflict will also make it impossible, or it not impossible, sorry, but it will make it harder for Ukraine to actually start rehabilitating its country and its nation. Because if there's only a ceasefire, all focus will still be at the potential warlike situation that everyone will be expecting to come. Now, if you get a peace deal, it will be easier for the time being. There can never be any absolute guarantees, but a peace deal is a much better guarantee than anything else at this moment. And then Ukraine can start focusing on looking out to where the 5 billion cryptocurrency went. They can start focusing on how to gain membership within the European Union, which I don't think the European Union is very interested in. But I mean, at least it will give the Ukrainian government something to feed its voters, or they will at least give them something to believe in once they can't believe in winning against Russia anymore. You always have to have something that keeps the people hopeful. So that's why a peace deal is the absolutely best scenario right now.
Trump has claimed that Zelensky can end the war immediately by accepting the terms that he thrashed out with Putin last week. These include, of course, giving up any dreams of NATO membership, which would leave, obviously, the likes of Merz and Stoltenberg and von der Leyen and all the other hawks with a lot of egg on their face, and also give up any claim to Crimea. But I mean, that's giving up Crimea is a done deal anyway, isn't it? I mean,
I think all territories right now are a done deal, because there is, looking at, if you just apply the military analysis onto the situation, there is no way that Ukraine can muster any kind of forceful liberation of its occupied territories right now. They just don't have the manpower. And Russia is right now, the Ukrainian front is leaking, and it's leaking more and more. And the drone advantage and artillery advantage on the Russian side, it's doing dreadful damage to the Ukrainian front lines in the Donbass. So what's going to happen if Zelensky says no, no, no to everything right now in Washington is that we're going to be here again in 2 years' time, and the Russian forces may be somewhere outside Odessa or outside Kiev. And we're going to say Ukraine should have taken what was offered in Alaska. It's just as you and me right now saying Ukraine should have taken what was offered in Istanbul. And before that, when Istanbul was on the table, you and me were saying Ukraine should have taken the Minsk agreement. So I mean, Russia has stated its intent. Everyone knows what Russia's intents are, and Russia has declared that this is, for them, this is a war of basically survival as they see it, and they're not going to back down. So does Ukraine believe that they have the capacity to move the Russians back from their territory? Then by all means they should continue fighting. However, the situation as it looks now is that Ukraine is never going to be able to push the Russian forces back unless the European Union commits its own manpower. I'm not talking about material. I'm not talking about tanks and guns and missiles. I'm talking about manpower. Unless the European Union puts manpower in place to help Ukraine make this push, it's not going to happen. So since that's not going to happen, I don't believe that Ukraine has any other alternative than to accept the Alaskan deal, unless they want to, 2 years down the line, have lost even more territory.
You make some very good points, and it's that sort of note of realism that European leaders need to bite off and chew on, the fact that, as you say, Ukraine has zero chance of pushing back the Russian line, for all that Zelensky claims that it's the Russians who are defaulting. It seems like a sort of World War I type scenario, like fighting around Ypres or something over 100 years ago. Attritional, high casualties, nobody really making any significant progress, Mats.
That's my favorite analogy right now, if you don't want to go back to the Napoleonic Wars, which people know even less about than the First World War. So I stick with the First World War. There's another thing that makes that analogy quite lucrative, and that's the fact that when Germany surrendered on November 18th, 1918, they were still holding quite a lot of French territory, if you remember. And the reason they had to disembark from the front lines and sign the Versailles Treaty was because there was an implosion from within, which is that old legend about the dagger in the back. And as we can see, there is already talks about daggers in the back in Ukraine. And should the peace deal be made and the treaty signed, you're going to quite quickly have a full-scale resemblance of what happened to the Germans post World War I in the worst-case scenario. Because, of course, as you know, World War I was just a precursor to World War II. And if this situation escalates, we will, in maybe 10 to 15 years' time, we will be back in a World War III scenario, which, for obvious reasons, won't be pretty. But let's tackle that hurdle when we come to it.
Well, hopefully we never do come to it. But somebody who seemed to want to bring it about, of course, is the dreaded former Assistant Secretary of State in the United States, Victoria Nuland, a real swamp creature, if ever there was one. And here she is testifying to Congress about how successful the CIA had been in overthrowing the previous Kiev administration, key events that led up to the current conflict.
And U.S. advisors serve in almost a dozen Ukrainian ministries and localities, helping to deliver services, eliminate fraud and abuse, improve tax collection, and modernize Ukrainian institutions. With U.S. help, newly vetted and trained police officers are patrolling the streets of 18 Ukrainian cities. In courtrooms across Ukraine, free legal aid attorneys funded by the U.S. have won 2/3 of all the acquittals in the countries. Treasury and State Department advisors have helped Ukraine shutter over 60 failed banks and protected the assets of depositors. And since there can be no reform in Ukraine without security, over $266 million of our support has been in the security sector, training 1,200 soldiers and 750 Ukrainian National Guard personnel, and supplying life-saving gear. In FY16, we are continuing that training and equipment of more of Ukraine's border guards, military, and Coast Guard.
There you go. That's the dreaded Victoria Nuland, one of the architects of the conflict. And of course, another one, bête noire of those of us who want a peaceful and just world, is George Soros, as we can hear now.
George Soros, pleasure to have you on.
Same here.
First, on Ukraine, one of the things that many people recognized about you was that you, during the revolutions of 1989, funded a lot of dissident activity, civil society groups in Eastern Europe, in Poland, the Czech Republic. Are you doing similar things in Ukraine?
Well, I set up a foundation in Ukraine before Ukraine became independent of Russia. And the foundation has been functioning ever since. And it played an important part in events now.
Do you think Ukraine will be able to assert a kind of independence from Russia and an alignment with the West, not a specific alignment as in NATO, but a kind of orientation toward the West, or will the Russians always stop them?
No, Putin will try to destabilize Ukraine. The foundation has been functioning ever since, and it played an important part in events now.
I'm sure he said that we've been trying to destabilize Ukraine, didn't he, Mats? Or am I hearing things?
No, you're not hearing things. That's what he said. And if we go back to Newland, it's a testimony I've listened to in its entirety, and she admits to having U.S. operatives embedded in the Ukrainian ministries. She says openly that Ukrainian-trained policemen are patrolling Ukrainian cities, that the U.S. Treasury was aiding Ukrainian banks, and by aiding I mean basically siphoning off a few millions of its money, and then of course hundreds and millions of dollars was funneled in to creating a Ukrainian military by ways of financing Western military companies that in their turn sent old equipment by way of Western Europe into Ukraine. So it was basically a classical, well-executed takeover that was shrouded in a world of US aid. But as we know, never trust US aid. It's always covert. So both Soros and the United States government have a huge responsibility for the situation today, which is often overlooked and ignored by Western media.
We've seen on social media this morning this extraordinary thing of a Ukrainian tank flying a US flag. I don't know that Donald Trump would necessarily be all that thrilled about this. Is this just somebody having a bit of fun, do you think? Or are they trying to claim that they do indeed have the support and protection of the United States military? There it goes. This has been seen on social media this morning. Of course, you never know these days if what you're watching is real or some kind of artificial intelligence. But we're used to seeing the Nazi flags, Mats, but I think this is the first time we've seen the stars and stripes attached to what appears to be a Ukrainian military vehicle.
I think it was a Russian military vehicle.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So it was, the story goes that it was a Russian military vehicle that was trolling one of the drones. But the problem with that video is I haven't had the time to look into it in depth. But I think the flags at some point, and this is what I read from someone else, so it's not what I've seen, that the flags somehow disappear during some part of that video. So it's I think the jury is still out on if it's a truthful video or not. But anyhow, it has its trolling. It gets its trolling points, no matter if it was true or not.
Yes, it does. Just to bring us up to date, Donald Trump has been raging against fake news, in particular with respect to the fallout from the Alaska summit, which ended early, incidentally. I saw another post on social media where somebody was complaining that the menu for the big lunch in Anchorage described Vladimir Putin as His Excellency. Well, that is, I believe, how he is supposed to be titled as president of Russia. I think they would have liked him to have seen him just described simply as Putin. They were said to have a lunch of filet mignon and a green salad with a champagne vinaigrette, but none of that came to pass. The meeting ended early, the Trump-Putin meeting, and American officials were said to have left ashen-faced. Have you got any insight, Mats, as to why that might be?
I read that as well, and no, I don't really have any speculation in as to why this perceived or this lunch never happened. You can look at it both ways, but the way I look at it, and there I'm considering what happened during the press conference. The press conference was very friendly. Now, had this been a short meeting where that would have ended in a total failure, I think the press conference would have been much more of a sober, mundane affair if there would have even been one. But now both Putin and Trump were praising each other. So therefore, I'm guessing that the shortness of the meeting was it was agreed upon that the Russian stated their claims and made it clear that this is our red line. We're not going to back off from it. And now you deal with it the way you see fit. And then the Americans realized it's no use for us to have any further debate. We need to take this back to Zelensky and the European vassals, and then we'll see what happens from there. But they were trying to keep, the situation within a diplomatic mood, and therefore they ended it early because there was nothing more to be said there and then. So I think there will be an upcoming meeting, maybe next week or maybe within 2 weeks' time. I'm happy as long as the diplomatic momentum now keeps going. Hopefully it will end in a meeting between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky, but one never knows.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to summarize it, Mats. We need the diplomatic activity to continue. It does appear that there's some sort of thaw amongst European leaders. A note of realism, one would hope, has finally crept into their thinking. It's a pity that they don't have the same attitude, of course, towards events in the Middle East, which are every bit as tragic. Incidentally, I've just seen a figure being reported that Russia has lost 100,000 troops this year alone. Would you give any credence to that figure, Mats?
No, not very much. I wouldn't. I've seen those numbers themselves. They are unconfirmed by any part that could be called neutral in this conflict. It's basically numbers that have been regurgitated and thrown around amongst the political elites within the Western sphere. So I don't hold that as a very credible or feasible number when it comes to Russian losses, because you have to remember that Putin is susceptible to internal critique. Now, had there been 100,000 casualties, that would have been noticed. It would have been impossible to suppress those kind of numbers. Yeah. So
yeah,
I
thought go on.
Yeah, it's not happening, and as we can see, that the Russian side still has an easy situation, or not an easy situation, but an easier situation of when it comes to recruitment. And once again, Russia has the Western nations to thank for this, because once you had German-produced tanks rolling in to Russian territories towards Kursk. I mean, even 60 or 70-year-old Afghanistan veterans was wanting to sign up to go back into combat, because you can't buy that kind of state propaganda that was basically served on a silver platter to the Russian nation. So Russia still has the internal narrative within the Russian state compared to that of the Ukrainian state. It's much more difficult for the Ukrainian government to find it within their manpower or within their group of men that are able to serve to actually to get them to serve, because a lot of Ukrainians realize that they are not going to be slaughtered by the Russians should the Russians occupy their cities. And basically, I mean, Ukraine has always been a divided nation between East and Western Ukraine. So for some people, it might even feel natural to belong to Russia if you just put this to a referendum instead of having to kill hundreds and thousands of people just to reach the same conclusion.
Oh, we can't have referendums. They indicate the will of the people. That's anathema, certainly to European leaders, as you know,
yes,
Matt.
Yes, it is.
Occasionally they have a referendum, but then completely disregard the results if they don't go the way they want. Now, speaking of European leaders, they're in an even more of a bind when it comes to the Middle East, because the standard narrative still coming out of Europe, although this has begun to change finally in the United States, and not for the better, of course, for the worse, is the mythical two-state solution with an independent Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank. But there's a fast-motion genocide going on in Gaza and a slow-motion genocide now underway in the West Bank. And if you don't believe me, if you don't want to take my word for it, then take the word of the Israeli Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir.
והפעם השיטה המבצעית שונה לחלוטין ממה שהיה בעבר. לא עוד פשיטות עם כניסות ויציאות, אנחנו כובשים, מטהרים ונשארים עד להשמדת חמאס. בדרך אנחנו משמידים את כל מה שעוד נשאר מהרצועה, פשוט, כי הכל שם זו עיר טרור אחת גדולה. במסגרת המלחמה צה"ל מניע אוכלוסייה מאזורי הלחימה ולא משאיר אבן על אבן. אני אומר לכם, פשוט תסתכלו על הסרטונים של מה שקורה ברצועת עזה. האוכלוסייה תגיע לדרום הרצועה ומשם בעזרת השם למדינות שלישיות. במסגרת תוכנית הנשיא טראמפ זה שינוי של מהלך ההיסטוריה, לא פחות. מינימום נדרש שיגיע לאוכלוסייה, פשוט כדי שהעולם לא יעצור אותנו ויאשים אותנו בפשעי מלחמה. צה"ל סוף סוף מנהל מערכה נגד השלטון האזרחי של חמאס, ולא מתמקד רק בתשתית הצבאית. אנחנו מחסלים שרים ופקידים וחלפנים וגורמים במערך הכלכלי והשלטוני של חמאס. במשך חודשיים וחצי לא הכנסנו סיוע הומניטרי לרצועת עזה. זה יצר לחץ גדול מאוד על חמאס, וטוב שכך. אבל גם לחץ צריך לדעת לבסט כדי שהוא לא יתפוצץ לנו בפנים. כשצה"ל חזר בימים האחרונים לתמרן בכל הכוח כדי לכבוש את רצועת עזה, כשצה"ל מניע אוכלוסייה מהמקום שבו עוד היה לה קצת אוכל, והידידים הכי גדולים שלנו בעולם, אלה שתומכים בנו, אלה שמבינים שאנחנו לא יכולים לעצור רגע לפני הניצחון המוחלט והשמדת חמאס, כשהם מבקשים מאיתנו לעזור להם, לעזור לנו ולהזים את שקרי ההרעבה, אנחנו צריכים לעשות את זה. מה שייכנס בימים הקרובים זה מעט שבמעט, כמה מאפיות שמחלקות פיתות לאנשים ומטבחים ציבוריים שנותנות מנה יומית של אוכל מבושל. אזרחים בעזה יקבלו פיתה וצלחת אוכל וזהו. זה בדיוק מה שאנחנו רואים בסרטונים, אנשים עומדים בתור ומחכים שכן ימזגו להם לצלחת איזה צלחת מרק. האם הייתי רוצה להימנע בכלל מהצורך להכניס גרגר לרצועת עזה? גם לא לאזרחים? יכול להיות. אני מבין מאוד את הכעס, אני מבין מאוד את כאבי הבטן שכולנו כאזרחים מרגישים. האמת היא שעד שאחרון החטופים חוזר, גם מים אנחנו לא צריכים לתת לרצועת עזה. אנחנו כבר שנה וחצי מכסחים לחמאס את הצורה, אנחנו מפרקים את עזה ומשאירים אותה כאויי חרבות עם הרס מוחלט וחסר תקדים בעולם, והעולם עוד לא עוצר אותנו. במטרה להגיע לתוצאה האחת והיחידה הנדרשת, כיבוש עזה, השמדת חמאס והשבת החטופים כולם. במילה אחת, ניצחון.
I feel I need to go and have a shower after listening to that. I feel absolutely filthy. I must apologize almost to viewers and listeners for making them listen to that demonic, homicidal psychopath saying the quiet part out loud there. The world hasn't stopped us. And he set out his plans for the total destruction of Gaza, saying it would be no problem to deny even a single grain into the besieged, well, not besieged now, you know, destroyed strip. It's a Holocaust, and it leaves the European Union, which of course disgracefully projected the Israeli flag onto the Commission headquarters a couple of years ago. Von der Leyen, very much the Israeli government's bedfellow. I won't say Netanyahu, because of course that's the fallback position at the moment, isn't it? You can say, oh, well, this is all Netanyahu's fault, but that's Itamar Ben-Gvir, another minister. It's not just the ministers, it's really the whole of the government and the whole of Israeli society that are hell-bent on finishing the Holocaust, Mats. Where does it leave the European Union and their feebly expressed urgings for more aid to be allowed in, urging for a ceasefire but not doing anything about it? I mean, they're still supplying weapons. We're in a very, very dark place with this one.
We are, and you have to remember, I mean, the legal historian in me is always very adamant to point out that the two-state solution is what currently exists. The old partition plan was the two-state solution. It's just that the Jewish state immediately started to cleanse and try to annex the territory designated for the Palestinian state. And then in the 60s, they started to permanently occupy that area in its entirety. So, I mean, the Palestinians were not prepared with an immediate government because they had not been running a state back in 1947 and 48. So they had no state that was waiting to seize power. So as to be expected, it took them longer to declare independence. But then, the state of Palestine has existed since the partition plan. It's just that it's been occupied. So this is the problem with the two-state solutions. I mean, the Zionists have expansionist aims, and the Palestinians did not accept the UN giving away part of its territories to settlers, which I don't think anyone really would want to do, because there's no authority. There was no authority for the British to do this. So that the British were just setting up conditions for war. And this is what we're living with now, because the partitions were too small and the borders were too weird for a protracted conflict not to be initiated. So once again, we have to go back to those British shenanigans to see where the problem lies. Now, in order for Israel to accept what was once agreed upon, you need to strong-arm Israel. And that's not going to happen. So since that's not going to happen, sadly, the way I see it, the best way is for Israel to declare a victory. And then you have to deal with the situation that the West let Israel literally get away with war crimes and ethnic cleansing. Because what's happening now, it's just a drawn out suffering. Instead of telling Israel, okay, you brutes win. We're not going to do anything with you because for some reason we're too afraid to question you. So it's better that you just cleanse the Palestinian areas, annex what's left of Palestine, and then continue on your evil ways. Because I think that would kill less people than the Palestinian people being killed right now. So unless the European Union grows a pair, Israel is going to ethnically cleanse what's left of mandated Palestine and the Palestinian nation. And history will be extremely harsh on the likes of von der Leyen and other European leaders. But
I hope it's not
that's not going to help the Palestinians that have died.
No, exactly. Well, it's not going to help the Palestinians that are still alive either. I mean, never mind history. The Geneva Convention on Genocide dictates that states have an obligation to intervene when there is even the possibility of genocide. And we've just heard overtly genocidal statements there from Ben-Gvir. The latest estimates are that somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million Palestinians may have already been slaughtered. George Galloway, the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, has called for military intervention. That call is growing, but of course, who exactly is going to go in and confront the Israelis? You know, I don't think we can just sit back and let barbarism win. We have to use the legal instruments available to us through the ICC, the ICJ, to hold not just people like Ben Gvir to account, but also von der Leyen and Starmer and all the other accomplices to genocide. Otherwise, Mats, we're living in a new era of barbarism. Well, we are living in an era of barbarism.
We are living in an era of barbarism. I mean, the old solutions for keeping some kind of framework for international law has, for all intents and purposes, crumbled. Where is the UN secretary? Where is he? I mean, I'm even trying to remember his name.
Gutierrez.
Thank you, Gutierrez. That's the dude. You know, but you know what I mean. You remember the word Hammarskjöld more than you remember the word Gutierrez. You remember the word Kofi Annan for all his faults. At least
Yes.
he was always on a plane going to conflict zones and trying to find people that could sit down and to be mediated with. But Gutierrez, I mean, God knows what he's doing or where he is, but he's seldom seen. He should be picking up frequent flyer miles like no one has done before between Jerusalem, between London, between Berlin, between Paris, between Moscow, between Kiev, between Tokyo, between Washington. You know,
and there I said Amman and Cairo as well, because
Amman and Cairo, and especially Riyadh, and for that matter Tehran. But Gutierrez, he's gone AWOL. He's missing. So therefore, I mean, there is no future really for this kind of. I know what the international law says. I know what it should be done. But if no one is willing to enforce it, other than when it's acceptable to the new world order, so to speak, or the rules-based order, then nothing is going to happen. So sadly, it's just a slow descent into barbarism.
Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left, Mats. There are two sort of major events upcoming with respect to the Gaza Holocaust, which, by the way, just because you don't see the casualty numbers every day or find out how many people have died of malnutrition or been blown to bits, doesn't mean it isn't happening all the time. The Israelis are preparing to raze Gaza City to the ground and kill everybody in it. Simple as that. They've made that quite plain. But over the next few weeks, of course, we've got the General Assembly of the United Nations coming up, where France and Britain, amongst others, have said they're going to recognize a Palestinian state, though where exactly that Palestinian state is geographically located, I'm not quite sure. And also we have the flotilla, the Subud flotilla, possibly 45 or 50 vessels sailing to break the siege. That's going to pose a media and diplomatic question. Well, the two things are going to pose big diplomatic questions for the Israelis, aren't they, Mats?
Oh yes, and but I think this recognition.
It's a hollow gesture.
It's a hollow gesture.
But the Israelis hate it. That's the thing you can say. I've been talking to people about it. I mean, it leaves Zionism in place. And a lot of people are saying that never mind about recognizing a Palestinian state, what world leaders should be doing is delegitimizing the Israeli state because of its actions.
But that's true. And I think looking at the number of countries that have recognized Palestine, it's the ones that are left are the few rules-based order countries, and now they're one after another declaring that they will recognize Palestine, and this will have implications for Palestine in the continued negotiations, because then it will be negotiations from a position as a recognized state with whatever comes with that power. So it's I would say it's a good thing. It's a hollow gesture, but it's still a gesture that gives some legal strength to Palestine in upcoming negotiations?
If there are indeed any upcoming negotiations, I think that's a rather optimistic outlook, Mats. I can't see a way out of the current situation other than, the disintegration of the Israeli state one way or another. There were 200,000 people on the streets of Tel Aviv, apparently demanding an end to the war. And I don't think the Israelis have realized quite how unpopular they are globally yet. Certainly the likes of Ben Gvir.
No, I think it will be a wake-up call shortly for a lot of the politicians there.
A lot of the politicians there, and indeed in the West. Mats Nilsson, a Swedish lawyer and geopolitical analyst, I can't thank you enough for joining me on The Leading Edge today here on Unprecedented TV.
Thank you.
As I said, I'm planning on going live from next week onwards, hopefully at 1 p.m. We'll see, to do a live news hour next week, every day, Monday to Friday, probably starting on Tuesday. We do have a bank holiday here in the UK next week, and I plan to be somewhere else, at least for that day. But thereafter, yes, Monday to Friday, live news with me, Basil Valentine, and a guest every day. And I look forward to seeing you all for that. But for now, it's over and out tomorrow. The one and only Phil Zimmerman, and we'll get to hear his record. See you all then. Unfiltered, uncensored, unprecedented TV.